Hi, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to Quest by Community. Today we have as our guest Gerard Mansour, who is the Senior Commissioner of Victoria, someone who is doing a lot of work and making change for us older people in the community to have a voice and be part of solutions to make our spaces for everybody a healthy, a welcoming and longevity time for all of us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ricky.
So tell us a little bit about yourself before we begin the journey of knowing about your role.
Yeah, thanks. So I've been in the role now for nearly 9 years as Commissioner for Senior Victorians. I originally trained as a youth worker. So I've always been passionate about working, with people. And later on in my career, I worked with children's services. And now I've got to the right place at the right time. Now I'm working with older people when I'm also older myself.
I read on your bio that you started in the role about 9 years ago. So tell us what got you excited to think, I think I might go for this role. What was it that got you to consider taking on this challenge of being the Commissioner?
It's interesting. I find, I don't know whether you and the viewers would, often ageing is sort of a bit of taboo. We don't talk a lot about it. I think often like to think that it's not going to come to us. And yet I always had this positive thing. I looked at the data, and one of the things that really struck me is if you're lucky enough to live to 60 and you're in pretty reasonable health, you've still got a third of your life left to live. So why do we want people feeling like they're on a bookshelf somewhere on a bookcase? So for me, it was really about a positive motivation. How can I have some positive stories and positive influence so people get a better outcome of life? And also that means being able to continue to contribute.
For people who are listening who may not be aware of, what is the Senior Commissioner for Victoria?
I have a couple of fundamental roles. So I'm appointed by the state government, and it's interesting where the role came from. There was a parliamentary inquiry about a dozen years ago, and lots of older people made a submission to the parliamentary inquiry. And one of the most common statements by people was, look, we feel as we get older that we're not heard anymore. We don't have a voice. So really that's my one primary word. How do I make sure that senior Victorians in all their enormous diversity have a voice? And I've learnt a lot. I've learnt a massive amount about diversity of older people. And so whether it's people living in a rural area, in a regional area, whether it's the people from non-English speaking backgrounds, LGBTIQ plus communities. So I think that's a really important part. What I've learnt and evolved in the role is having ways that I can capture that diversity. Older people aren't one type. They're an enormous diverse community, and my job as a commissioner is to represent that diversity.
How have you seen, like in your time when you first started undertaking that role, did you find that you had to kind of go to other parliamentarians when it became to issues that you saw were important for older people in our community?
One of the things that's changed progressively over time is that with, I think, the ageing of the population, what happens when we get older is become a little bit more of a focus for everybody. And I think the biggest change that came was the advent of some of those Four Corners and other programs putting shining a light on what happened in residential aged care. And I think that lots of people said, well, wait a minute, these are people that have given so much to our community. How are we as a collective standing up for those people once they move into residential aged care? So I saw a real shift in the last 4 or 5 years where in the early part of my role, I often feel like I was standing on a train platform and I'd be waving and saying as the train left the station, oh, what about older people? Now I find so many different government departments here in Victoria, ministers can now come to me proactively, and there's a recognition that senior Victorians are a really important part of our community.
As I'm going to that phase of being thought of as a senior, one of the areas that I wanted to ask you was how you came to kind of understand a little bit about working with diversity, and for me, knowing about the LGBTIQ community. Was this something when you first started in the briefing, or was this something that gradually evolved and that people from my communities came to you and say, hey, we need our voices heard, this is what's happening?
Ricky, very much both. Both of those things happened. I very quickly came to understand that if I'm going to represent the diversity of voices that occur across Victoria from a seniors point of view, then I need mechanisms and structures to do that. So I do a few different things. So take the Mental Health Royal Commission a few years ago. So whilst in my career I've done a lot of work, it tends to have been more in the universal services sector, like children's services and youth work. So I felt a really significant knowledge gap. How was I going to represent the voices of people that needed mental health support if I didn't properly understand? And so with the support of lots of peak bodies and other organisations, they brought together a group of about 60 people with living experience of mental health, people and their carers, and that out of those conversations I really drew my entire submission. And I based it in the real lives of older people. And if people read one of my many reports, they'll notice that a core part of every report is actually quotes of people themselves. That's really my role, to bring those voices to the attention of government. So sometimes with things like that, it's a very targeted approach. I've got a knowledge gap and I need to reach out into the community in so many different ways. There's other times, like I'd published a report back in 2020 about ageing well. This is a really significant area of interest for us all. What can we do to age well? And what I wanted was to capture that story and that narrative from the voices and the perspectives of older people. And so I did an online survey. I travelled around the state and met older people from 27 different local government areas. I met with the LGBTIQ+ community. I met emerging communities. You know, we've got a wonderful diversity from cold communities here in Victoria. We've also got newer communities and new ones arriving. And so at the end of that consultation process, I was able to publish what I called the 8 attributes of ageing well that represent those views and those aspirations of older people themselves.
What do you see are some of the key issues for people to live well and to improve quality of life?
I think a lot of us are drawn to think about it and start from a health paradigm and a health discussion, and that's really important. There'll be a lot of listeners and viewers at the moment who will be reminding themselves about the Use It or Lose It campaign.
Yeah.
That was a really powerful and norm in getting out there. So I think that at a base level, lots of people know that exercise, physical exercise, is a really important thing. Well, that's only one of the 8 attributes. Things that became really clear to me is if we want to live a fulfilling life, having respect is a really critical part of it. Having things that give us meaning and purpose in life. I mean, if I go into any community in Victoria and I look at who are the people that are on local committees, who are the people that are providing opportunities for our community to participate, it's often senior Victorians. They're on committees, they're doing volunteering. And so really those 8 attributes are about what gives people meaning and purpose in life and continues to inspire us as we get older.
Going on to that sort of thing, one of the areas that I'm really drawn to and I like to encourage other people has been in my own living experiences of volunteering and being involved in community and building networks. What messages would you like to sort of say to people who are listening, especially from our LGBTIQ community, First Nations, people with disabilities who are older and want to do something? Why should we go and do something?
So part of it is that from listening to older people and building those attributes, it's actually good for us. It's good for us to have an outlook and looking outward part of our life. The other thing is that we've still got an enormous amount to contribute. You know, in a lot of ways, we're getting to the critical point of our life. We've got all this life experience behind us. And so here's an opportunity for us to give back to the community in some way. And one of the things that has happened in our communities post-COVID and, you know, with the COVID recovery we're involved in, quite a few people that were involved in volunteering have pulled back a bit. There's been a decline of nearly 30% in the volunteering rate. Now, some of that is because people might have delayed their overseas trips and they're prioritising, let's put me first for a little while. So there's some of that type of thinking going on. But a lot of it's about people having an opportunity to think, well, what motivates me as I get older? What's going to give me the bounce to get out of bed in the morning? And so the state government's put together a wonderful website about volunteering.vic.gov.au, where people can go and explore the whole range of activities of volunteering. So it could be going to an aged care home as a volunteer and just sitting and talking with people. It could be going to an opportunity shop. It could be involved in being on a local committee. It could be involved with being on a men's shed. It could be intergenerational. One of the things that's the really evolving field is the rapid change in technology. And there's lots of older people that would like to learn more from a technology point of view. So I think it's about matching interests. What are the things that motivate and inspire us, and what volunteering opportunities will draw that out so that we get that continuing bounce in our step?
Yeah, and I think that with volunteering, it does sort of give us that sense of having something to build our identity. That's that one can enjoy being at this stage of your life, but also having something to contribute and feeling valued. So that reciprocal relationship that you build, that you're giving something, but you also get so much back. And that's one thing I wanted to share with everyone too, is that the importance of making that step of that connection, and even maybe sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone. What are some of the challenges, we could say, for someone who's older that wants to volunteer?
I think the starting point is to be aware of the broad range of opportunities. There are an enormous range of opportunities. So someone, for example, that might have been more involved in education might be interested to go to the University of the Third Age. Now, this is a wonderful idea where, say I've got an interest in French or in history, I can volunteer as a tutor, and I can share my knowledge and understanding with other people. I might host a book club. I might go along to the local men's sheds organisation and help be on the committee to run activities. So there's a lot of those sort of opportunities. The others are advocacy. Don't underestimate the enormous contribution, people like yourself, Ricky, that see that there's something that they can do to make the lives of others better. And so there are lots of fantastic advocacy organisations, the work of the Housing for the Aged Action Group, the work of Switchboard. There are so many organisations that rely heavily on volunteers so that they can continue to do the work. So advocacy is another wonderful opportunity. So some of it's sort of like assisting people individually, one-to-one. Others is more of an advocacy role. Others is more of a convening type activity like a men's shed or a U3A or a life activities club.
Just on that thing, one of the issues that I wanted to ask you, that you may have come across with the going changes we got in Victoria at the moment with housing, it's becoming an issue. We have this sort of influx of people wanting to enter the market, the housing market, and then those of us, for whatever reason, who are older, where do we go? And I guess it's hard for you to maybe help answer, but at least where do we go when it comes to when you're older and finding suitable, affordable housing? Is there a plan, do you envisage in Victoria that we could work toward?
I'd say it's in the category, Ricky, of being work in progress. I think we're making some slow steps. So, for example, in the state government's announcement around the big build, where they're investing billions of dollars, we've identified over the last few years that one of the fastest growing areas of housing stress is actually older women. And so they're now one of the priority cohorts. So for women aged over 55, they can be fast-tracked into the housing system. But in the end, the real challenge we've got is we just don't have enough housing. And so as the government rolls out over the next decade this massive amount of housing investment, then gradually we'll start to get on top of it. But at the moment, people are going to have very, very mixed experiences. And I acknowledge that's come through very clearly in my conversations with older people, particularly those that are on, say, a fixed income like a pension and in the private rental market. I think there's very clear housing stress that occurs in those situations.
And I think what you were saying too, this ties in quite nicely, that for those of you who are listening and thinking, well, what can I do? I guess one could consider going onto the volunteer website and seeing, perhaps keying in housing advocacy, talking to groups to see how you can volunteer in that space and maybe making a difference, talking
Absolutely.
about how to help other people who perhaps don't have the voice or who are less mobile, to see what they can do to lobby the government so that our voices are heard. When should we start looking at aged care? Because we hear so much about that there are packages which is different from NDIS, and that I'm accessing. So can you explain to people who are listening, perhaps who are getting up to that stage in life, to look at, and especially for our queer community, people with disabilities, newly arrived migrants who are reaching that age, where do you go? Where do we start?
When I did the report, I mentioned, Ricky, Ageing Well in a Changing World. This was something that was really important for me to understand. And why is it that some people, as their needs emerge, connect to services and support very early on, and yet for other people this is a real challenge, and the challenge often comes from the fear of loss of independence. And so there's often a false perception. If I put my hand up and acknowledge that I need some support or assistance, it could be like a walking frame, it could be a hearing aid, in some way I'm giving into this stigma that I'm getting older. And so the first thing that I learned is we've got to reverse that thinking. The earlier in our lives that we can plan and acknowledge, and look, if the reality is, if we're lucky to live long enough, we will need help one day. It's almost certain. So what can we do to step into that earlier on? And there's wonderful support organisations to assist in that process. So we've got the Older Persons Advocacy Network, we've got Elder Rights Advocacy, where people can reach out and get some support and assistance and guidance. And very importantly, they've now got what they call a navigation service. So one of the challenges for aged care in particular, it's very complex. Do I want home care? Do I want residential aged care? What are the different supports I can receive at home? And so I'm very pleased to say if people reach out to the Elder Rights Advocacy Organisation, they can get very timely support.
And that's sort of important to know, that it's about you reaching out, and it doesn't mean that if I'm finding information, I'm going to lose something of myself.
Exactly.
That's
exactly
what
right,
we want
Ricky.
to see. Now, another aspect to this, and it's a difficult question to ask, but it's an important one, and that's the one of advanced care planning. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that and why it's an important aspect that we should all be thinking about?
Yeah, one of the things that happens to lots of us as we get older, and again, it's something that a lot of people probably don't think about very clearly, the people around us in our life tend to change. We start to outlive our neighbours move into new areas, our families itself might change. Children and grandchildren might move interstate or overseas. People from the LGBTIQ plus community might have a very different sense of family, a sense of family by identity. So one of the best protective mechanisms, and it's it's like a personal question for all of us, who is going to be my voice if I start to need assistance later on? And how do I make my wishes known? How do I have people that are in my life, that are close to me, that understand what my wishes are? Particularly, very sadly, if someone was confronting early onset dementia, for example. So advanced care planning gives us a lot of opportunity to think about the things that are important to us. What are our values? If we had a catastrophic life accident or incident, would we want to be resuscitated? And so providing guidance to the people that are close in our lives is a really important part of it. So advanced care planning, powers of attorney, thinking about our wills, they're a really important part of having a positive experience of ageing, because we've given clarity to the people close to us about what our wishes are. And if I've learned something in this role, that's often the tension with families and friends and loved ones. They actually don't know, what did our dear loved one want? What were their wishes? What were the things that were, that they wanted us to do? And very sadly, it can cause conflict, because people genuinely have very different understandings of what the wishes were of their loved ones. So taking the time to put some words on a piece of paper. There's great government websites that people can upload it onto, their health records. Taking the time to do that and making their wishes known is such a powerful part of controlling that part of our journey and as we get older.
Another, I guess, a taboo area that I wanted to ask you about is the one of elders' abuse. and this is something I know within the LGBTIQ community that we're looking at the moment. Why is it important that we need to speak about elders' abuse, and how can we make a change in that space?
Yeah, this is a really important topic, Ricky, and one that is a bit of taboo. And part of the reason for it is that we don't really have a broad understanding across the community about what is elder abuse. And so it could be financial abuse of an adult son or child, or a friend or a neighbour or a grandchild. It could be emotional abuse. Demeaning language, talking down to us, you're not worth anything, you've got nothing to contribute in life anymore. It could be physical, it could be sexual, and so there are a whole range of different ways that, very sadly, around about 1 in 6 older people have an experience of elder abuse. So a really important part of our planning, if I was to suggest one really important thing to the viewers and listeners, it would be keep your loved ones around you as you age. Don't allow yourself to become isolated and disconnected from the people that are a really important part of their life. The biggest risk factor that I see to elder abuse is isolation and loneliness.
Okay.
So the more people are isolated from their friends and their loved ones, they're opening the opportunity for others to move in and abuse them. And so, yeah, stay connected, share your wishes with the people that are really important to you, but also know help is there. We've got fantastic organisations like Seniors Rights Victoria, who have specialist people, advocates, lawyers that can assist, and the most important thing is act early. If people have got a fear or got a concern, or, I'm experiencing something, I've got a wish to do something and people are blocking that, explore, is it abuse? What's happening in their life?
It's really important to know, and that really ties back to what you were saying before, that if you wanted to do something and you're able to, being a volunteer, there's a possibility perhaps if people could contact these organisations and say, is there space to learn to be an advocate? Now, I remember years ago when I was a social worker, we had a role which was the advocate for people with disabilities. That was an independent. Do we have one for ageing that people are?
Yeah, there's a few different advocate roles. We've got a whole range of different advocate roles. So we've got people that have a particular focus, say, on identity. So we've got the LGBTIQ plus Commissioner, Todd Fernando, does a fantastic job. Then we've got someone like Kay Patterson, who is the Federal Age Discrimination Commissioner. We've got Ro Allen, who is our Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner. So the thing that binds all of us is we spend a lot of time talking and sharing ideas with each other, that we're all strong advocates on behalf of people that are often disempowered in life, that don't know what their rights are, what their opportunities are. And it just reminded me of what you were saying before about the opportunity to volunteer. I do a lot of community education sessions. I think one of the most important things I can do, and sometimes I feel like my main role is in the community to be a storyteller. I take the learnings of what people have very kindly and generously shared with me and share those with other older people. And in some of those programs, the people that I share the stage with are actually older people themselves with living experience that come, and they might share their experience of elder abuse or challenges in the family. And that gives it a really concrete, strong focus and approach. So people like myself and the commissioners and the different, advocates at that level, that's one part of the work. But a lot of the most significant change happens at the local level. People that are making a personal commitment to make a difference in life.
Where do you see us heading in, say, 20 years' time? Where do you hope that we could be in, say, 20 years' time?
I think a couple of things, yeah.
You being in your role?
Yep. Well, it's a wonderful thing about being a commissioner older. I can age in place.
Yes.
I think a couple of things are really important priorities for us all. So that phrase I just said there, ageing in place, it's really clear to me when you listen to older people and their aspirations. Most of us want to age and grow older in our community. And what happens in our local community with our friends and our loved ones and the people that are close to us is even more important as we get older. So the ageing in place issue is a really important one from a policy perspective, and I name that with government. I say, what are the things that we can do to make sure that people can age in place? And of course, not surprisingly, connecting to services and support as our needs change is a really critical part of that. an emerging issue, and this is something that's rapidly changed for us through the COVID experience, is the role of digital technology and connectivity in our lives. And I see a real challenge here and a real opportunity for us. Lots of older people are fantastic on technology. I think I'm okay. I meet people in their 90s that have put me to shame, that have been involved in technology for all their lives. But I think there's a real risk that the whole world rapidly moves to a digital front end and assumes that older people don't want to be involved. So I think one of the really big challenges and opportunities is how do we encourage older people to be better engaged with technology as we get older? In my role, Ricky, I from time to time have an opportunity to do some wonderful things. And I can remember during the COVID lockdown, I was invited to go along to a Zoom graduation session. And I thought, oh, this is something a bit different. I haven't done anything like a Zoom graduation session before. And so I go online, and here are 20 people that are all aged nearly in their 80s, who have learnt to use Zoom when we didn't have an opportunity to go face to face. So they've had telephone support and assistance, and every one of those people had English not as their primary language at home. So can you imagine how excited they were that they were able to learn Zoom, and they'd learnt something about themselves. They never thought they could do it, but with support and assistance and encouragement, they were able to do it. But I do think on the other side, there's always going to be a group of people for whom the digital world is a step too far. And so as businesses, as governments think about the role of technology, we must work out how we keep the person. How do we keep a practical face for the people that aren't going to be online to also have a personal way to get support?
That's so important. And I love the fact that you've mentioned that there will always be a safety net for people who cannot go to that sort of space. Now I want to ask you a little bit about you. Where do you see yourself in, say, 10 years' time?
Look, I'm very fortunate, Ricky. I actually work in this job part-time. Part of what was important to me was to balance my own life. So I work 3.5 days a week. On a Monday afternoon, I pick up my 2 grandchildren from school, and they come back to my place, and I have an opportunity to have what I call par-time. And of course, the wonderful thing about that is that it's my rules in my house, which means they can do whatever they want. So within reason. So yeah, look, I have a wonderful opportunity in my life to keep very closely connected. I'm also the chair of an organisation that supports homeless older people. And so wonderful. I like also to put what I'm talking to the viewers into practice. And so volunteering is an important part of my life. So my commissioner role is part of my work. Volunteering is a really important part of my life, but also time with my grandchildren. I think that there's something about the intergenerational connections that's really elevated in focus. I think whether it was the 4-year-old kindergarten and aged care programs that kicked it off. But I notice in my recent conversations that I'm doing at the moment for my next report about ageing well, which I'll be publishing next year, the interest in intergenerational programs has massively increased in the last 3 years. When I had my last consultations in 2019, it hardly came up. People's interest in intergenerational activity and involvement was very rarely spoken about. This time, it was actually one of the dominant things, that as we get older, we like to connect across the generations, across our areas of interest with young people, middle-aged people. So I think they're things that I'm very fortunate, that I try to learn from what people are sharing with me, and as best I can, put it in practice in my own life.
It's been a wonderful experience having you today, our Commissioner.
Thanks very much, Ricky.
Thank you so much for everyone who's listening. And again, the takeaway message, if you want to do something, make a change in this world, you're never too old. Hop onto that website for Volunteering Victoria and make a change. Even if you can give yourself 1 hour a week, do something and connect with someone else, because you will get so much out of it. Thank you so much for listening to Quest by Community. This is Ricky Spencer.